Lucas wiped the sweat from his brow, the summer heat making the garage feel like an oven. The rhythmic clank of tools and the hum of engines were the sounds of his everyday life. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost noon. Time for a quick break. As he walked towards the small office in the back, he couldn't help but smile at the sight of the old posters and greasy rags that decorated the space. This garage had been his sanctuary for as long as he could remember. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the bitter aroma filling the air, and sat down to enjoy a moment of peace. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up outside. Lucas stood up, curious, and peeked through the window. A sleek, black sedan had parked near the entrance, a stark contrast to the usual beat-up vehicles that frequented his shop. The driver, a man in a crisp suit, stepped out and adjusted his tie before making his way towards the office. Lucas opened the door just as the man reached for the handle. "Can I help you?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mr. Lucas Miller," the man inquired, his voice smooth and authoritative. "That's me." "And you are?" "Michael Harris," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm an attorney. May I have a moment of your time?" Lucas hesitated but then nodded, gesturing for Michael to come in. They sat down in the cramped office, the contrast between their appearances stark. Michael placed a briefcase on the desk and opened it, pulling out a thick envelope. "I represent the estate of Charles Beaumont," Michael began. "I'm here to inform you that you are his rightful heir." Lucas blinked, taken aback. "I think you have the wrong person. I don't know any Charles Beaumont." Michael smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm afraid there is no mistake, Mr. Miller. Charles Beaumont was your biological father." The words hung in the air, heavy and surreal. Lucas felt a sudden rush of emotions, confusion, disbelief, and a flicker of hope. His mind raced back to the faint memories of his childhood, of the parents who had raised him with love but never mentioned anything about another family. "I don't understand," Lucas finally said, shaking his head. "Why now? Why me?" "All will be explained in due time," Michael assured him. "But for now, you need to know that you are the sole heir to a substantial fortune. Mr. Beaumont's estate includes several businesses, properties, and considerable financial assets." Lucas stared at the envelope, his mind struggling to process the information. His simple, predictable world had just been upended in a matter of minutes. Michael closed his briefcase and stood up. "I understand this is a lot to take in. Here are all the documents you'll need to review. Please, take your time. When you're ready, contact me, and we'll discuss the next steps." Lucas took the envelope, still in a daze, and walked Michael to the door. As he watched the lawyers drive away, he felt a mix of excitement and fear. His life had just taken a dramatic turn, and he had no idea what lay ahead. He returned to the office, the envelope feeling like a weight in his hands. Lucas knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever be the same again. Lucas sat at his small, cluttered desk, staring at the thick envelope Michael Harris had left behind. The noise of the garage faded into the background as he carefully opened it, revealing a stack of legal documents, letters, and photographs. Each piece of paper seemed to add another layer to the mystery of his newfound identity. The first document was a letter from Charles Beaumont himself, written in a shaky but elegant hand. Lucas began to read. "Dear Lucas, if you are reading this, then the time has come for you to learn the truth about your heritage. I am your biological father. Circumstances forced me to make difficult decisions, but not a day has gone by that I haven't thought of you. You are my rightful heir, and I hope you will accept what is yours by birthright. With all my love. Charles Beaumont." Lucas' hands trembled as he placed the letter aside. The man he had never known had thought of him every day? It was almost too much to comprehend. He continued to sift through the documents, finding birth certificates, adoption papers, and legal declarations that painted a picture of a life he had never imagined. Among the papers was a photograph of a grand mansion, its facade imposing and elegant. It stood in stark contrast to his modest home and humble garage. The back of the photo had a date and the words, Beaumont Estate. Memories of his childhood flashed before him, simple, happy times with his adoptive parents, who had always been open about his adoption but never mentioned his biological family. He remembered the love and warmth they provided, but also the unspoken questions that had lingered in the background of his mind. Lucas looked up, his eyes drawn to the window where the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garage. He knew he had to get answers, to understand why his life had been split in such a way. Resolutely, he picked up his phone and dialed the number on Michael Harris's business card. "Mr. Harris, it's Lucas Miller. I think we need to talk." The next morning, Lucas found himself standing in the lobby of a sleek office building, feeling out of place among the polished professionals bustling around him. The receptionist directed him to Michael Harris's office, and soon he was sitting across from the lawyer once again. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Miller," Michael said, offering a professional smile. "I know this must be overwhelming." "That's an understatement," Lucas replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "I need to understand everything. Why was I never told about my real family? And why now?" Michael nodded, opening a file on his desk. "Your father, Charles Beaumont, had his reasons. He was a powerful man with many enemies. To protect you, he arranged for your adoption. Only after his passing could the truth be revealed." Lucas absorbed the information, his thoughts a whirlwind. "So, what happens now?" "Now," Michael said, leaning forward, "you have a choice. You can claim your inheritance and step into the world your father left for you. But be warned, it won't be easy. There are those who will contest your claim." "Like my cousins?" Lucas asked, recalling the hostility at the mansion. "Precisely," Michael confirmed. "They believe the fortune should remain within their control. You'll need legal support, and I believe Clara, one of our best attorneys, would be perfect for this case." As if on cue, the door opened, and Clara walked in. She was poised and professional, with an air of confidence that immediately put Lucas at ease. "Mr. Miller, it's a pleasure to meet you," she said, extending her hand. "Likewise," Lucas replied, shaking her hand. He couldn't help but notice the warmth in her eyes, a contrast to the cold demeanor of his cousins. "We have a lot of work ahead of us," Clara said, taking a seat. "But with your cooperation, I believe we can secure your rightful place." Lucas nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, he felt he had a chance to discover the truth and claim the life that was meant for him. Lucas took a deep breath as he stepped out of the elevator, the ornate doors of the law firm's office closing behind him with a soft chime. The reception area was pristine, with polished floors and sleek furniture that radiated wealth and sophistication. He felt a wave of unease wash over him, but he squared his shoulders and walked up to the receptionist. "I have an appointment with Mr. Harris and Miss Clara Johnson," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Of course, Mr. Miller," the receptionist replied with a professional smile. "They're expecting you. Please follow me." Lucas was led through a maze of hallways and offices until they reached a large conference room. Michael Harris and Clara Johnson were already there, deep in discussion over a stack of papers spread out on the table. They looked up as Lucas entered, and Clara's face lit up with a welcoming smile. "Lucas, glad you could make it," Michael said, standing to shake his hand. "Please, have a seat." Lucas nodded and took a seat across from them, feeling a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Clara handed him a folder, her expression serious. "This contains an overview of your father's estate," she began. "As you can see, it's extensive. We're talking about multiple properties, investments, and several businesses. It's a lot to take in, but we'll guide you through every step." Lucas opened the folder and scanned the documents. It was overwhelming, figures and legal terms that made his head spin. "And my cousins?" he asked, looking up. "They're contesting the will," Michael confirmed. "They've already filed a suit to challenge your claim. They believe they have a stronger right to the inheritance due to their long-standing involvement in the family businesses." Clara leaned forward, her eyes meeting Lucas's. This is where we come in. We need to prove your legitimacy and establish your rightful claim. It's not just about the money, Lucas. It's about your place in your father's legacy. Lucas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. I understand, he said. What do we need to do? First, we need to gather evidence, Clara explained. Documents, witnesses, anything that can support your claim. We'll start by interviewing people who knew your father and looking into the family history. Lucas nodded, his mind racing. And what about the threats? My garage was vandalized after Mr. Harris visited me. Clara's expression hardened. We'll address that too. Intimidation tactics won't be tolerated. We'll make sure you're protected. As they discussed the details, Lucas couldn't help but feel a growing respect for Clara. Her professionalism and determination were evident, and he found himself trusting her judgment. There was also a subtle warmth in her interactions, a genuine concern for his well-being that was both comforting and reassuring. After the meeting, Lucas left the law firm feeling a mix of emotions, overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation but also determined to fight for what was rightfully his. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but with Clara and Michael by his side, he felt more prepared to face the challenges ahead. The next few days were a blur of meetings and paperwork. Clara and Michael worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and building a solid case. Lucas found himself spending more time at the law firm, learning about his father's businesses and the intricacies of the legal battle he was about to face. Despite the stress and pressure, there was a sense of purpose driving him forward. Lucas was no longer just a mechanic, he was stepping into a world he never knew existed, driven by the need to honor his father's legacy and secure his rightful place. One evening, after a particularly long day, Clara suggested they take a break. How about a walk to clear our heads, she proposed with a smile. Lucas agreed, and they left the office, walking through the city streets as the sun set. The cool evening air was refreshing, and for a moment, Lucas felt a sense of normalcy return. Thank you for everything, Clara, he said, breaking the comfortable silence. I couldn't do this without you. Clara looked at him, her expression softening. You're stronger than you think, Lucas. We'll get through this together. As they walked side by side, Lucas felt a connection growing between them. It was more than just professional camaraderie, it was a burgeoning friendship and perhaps something deeper. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope, not just for his legal battle, but for his future. The mansion loomed ahead of Lucas, its grandeur almost intimidating. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. This was his first encounter with his extended family since learning about his heritage, and he knew it wouldn't be easy. Clara walked beside him, her presence a reassuring anchor. They were greeted at the door by a stern-looking butler who led them through the opulent halls to a large sitting room. The walls were adorned with portraits of ancestors, each face staring down with a mix of judgment and expectation. Lucas felt a pang of unease, as if the eyes in the portraits were evaluating his worthiness. His cousins were already there, their expressions a mix of hostility and curiosity. Gerald, the eldest, stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid and commanding. Next to him were his siblings, Victoria and Edward, their faces cold and calculating. Lucas, Gerald said, his voice dripping with disdain. To what do we owe the pleasure? Lucas squared his shoulders, meeting Gerald's gaze. I believe we have matters to discuss regarding the estate, he replied evenly. Gerald's eyes narrowed. There's nothing to discuss. You're an outsider, and you have no right to our family's legacy. That's for the court to decide, Clara interjected, her tone calm but firm. Lucas has every right to be here. We're simply ensuring that his claim is fairly considered. Victoria stepped forward, her eyes glinting with malice. Fairly considered? You've been gone all these years, living your simple life, while we've been here, managing the businesses and maintaining the family name. You don't belong here. Lucas felt a surge of anger but kept his composure. I didn't choose this, he said quietly. But now that I know the truth, I can't walk away. Edward snorted. Truth? You think you know the truth? Our father was the one who held this family together. You can't possibly understand the responsibilities that come with this inheritance. Before Lucas could respond, Gerald raised a hand. Enough. This is not the place for such discussions. We'll settle this in court. Clara nodded. Agreed. We'll let the legal system determine the rightful heir. The tension in the room was palpable as Lucas and Clara made their way out. As they walked back to the car, Lucas felt a mix of frustration and determination. His cousin's hostility only fueled his resolve to fight for what was rightfully his. That went about as well as expected, Clara said, breaking the silence as they drove away from the mansion. Lucas sighed. They're not going to make this easy. No, they won't, Clara agreed. But we're prepared. The key is to stay focused and not let their tactics get to you. Lucas nodded, appreciating her support. Thank you, Clara. I don't know what I'd do without you. She smiled, a hint of warmth in her eyes. We're in this together, Lucas. We'll get through it. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Lucas and Clara worked tirelessly, gathering more evidence and preparing for the upcoming court case. Lucas spent hours poring over documents and learning about his father's businesses, immersing himself in a world that was still foreign to him. Despite the constant pressure, Lucas felt a growing sense of purpose. This was more than just a legal battle, it was a fight for his identity and his place in the world. Each day, he grew more confident and more determined to see justice done. As the court date approached, the tension mounted. Lucas knew that the outcome would shape his future, and he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. With Clara by his side, he felt a renewed sense of hope and strength. Lucas sat in the law firm's conference room, surrounded by stacks of documents and evidence meticulously organized by Clara and her team. The atmosphere was intense but focused, the weight of the upcoming court battle pressing down on everyone. Clara looked up from her laptop, her eyes sharp and determined. We've gathered substantial evidence to support your claim, Lucas. We have documents proving your father's intention to make you his heir, testimonies from people who knew him well, and financial records that establish your connection. Lucas nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and anxiety. What's our next move? We need to build a strong narrative, Clara explained. The court needs to see not just the legal proof, but also understand the human side of this story. You need to be prepared to speak about your upbringing, your adoptive parents, and how this revelation has impacted your life. Lucas leaned back, thinking about his adoptive parents. They had always been open about his adoption but had never hinted at his true heritage. He felt a pang of sadness, missing their guidance now more than ever. Okay, he said, meeting Clara's gaze. I'm ready to do whatever it takes. Over the next few days, Clara worked with Lucas to prepare his testimony. They practiced in the conference room, Clara coaching him on how to present his story compellingly and truthfully. Lucas was surprised at how natural it felt to open up to her, sharing memories and emotions he had kept buried for years. One evening, as they wrapped up another long session, Clara suggested they take a break. How about a walk? We've been cooped up in here for too long. Lucas agreed, and they stepped out into the cool evening air. The city was alive with lights and sounds, a stark contrast to the quiet intensity of the office. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of the day's work slowly lifting. You're doing great, Lucas, Clara said, breaking the silence. I know this isn't easy, but your story is powerful. The court will see that. Lucas smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. Thanks, Clara. I couldn't do this without you. Clara looked at him, her expression softening. We're a team. And I believe in you. As they walked back to the office, Lucas felt a renewed sense of determination. He was not just fighting for an inheritance, he was fighting for his identity, his family's legacy, and his future. And with Clara by his side, he knew he stood a real chance. The following days were a blur of final preparations. Clara and Michael reviewed every piece of evidence, refining their strategy and ensuring nothing was overlooked. Lucas spent hours memorizing details and rehearsing his testimony, his confidence growing with each passing day. On the eve of the court hearing, Clara gathered everyone for a final briefing. "Tomorrow is the big day," she said, her voice steady and reassuring. "We've done everything we can to prepare. Now it's time to present our case and trust in the truth." Lucas nodded, feeling a mix of nerves and anticipation. "Thank you all for your hard work. No matter what happens, I'm grateful for everything you've done." Clara smiled, a hint of pride in her eyes. "We're not done yet, Lucas. Tomorrow, we'll show them the truth." As Lucas left the office that night, he felt a sense of calm determination. The journey had been long and challenging, but he was ready to face whatever came next. With Clara and Michael by his side, he felt stronger than ever. The morning of the court hearing dawned clear and bright, but Lucas felt a knot of tension in his stomach. He dressed carefully, choosing a suit Clara had helped him pick out. It felt strange, wearing something so formal, but it also gave him a sense of purpose and confidence. Today was the day he would stand up for his rightful place. He arrived at the courthouse early, meeting Clara and Michael outside. Clara gave him a reassuring smile. "You look great, Lucas. Remember, just be yourself and tell the truth." Lucas nodded, trying to steady his nerves. "Thanks, Clara. I'm ready." Inside, the courtroom buzzed with activity. Reporters, lawyers, and spectators filled the benches, the air thick with anticipation. Lucas felt all eyes on him as he walked to his seat, the weight of his family's legacy pressing down on him. The judge entered, and everyone stood. The proceedings began, and Lucas felt a rush of adrenaline as the opening statements were made. His cousin's lawyer painted a picture of a stable, well-managed estate that Lucas had no part in, while Clara countered with evidence of Lucas's rightful claim and the questionable actions of his cousins. As the testimonies began, Lucas listened intently. Former employees of his father spoke of Charles Beaumont's integrity and his clear intentions to leave everything to Lucas. Witnesses recounted how Charles had spoken fondly of his son and expressed his desire to protect him from the dangerous elements of his business. Then it was Lucas's turn. Clara guided him through his testimony, asking questions that allowed him to share his story, the loving home his adoptive parents provided, the shock of learning about his biological father, and the threats and vandalism he faced since discovering the truth. "How has this revelation affected you, Mr. Miller?" Clara asked gently. Lucas took a deep breath, looking directly at the judge. "It's been overwhelming. I grew up not knowing about my real father, and now I'm fighting to honor his wishes and secure my place in this family. I'm not here for the money, I'm here because it's the right thing to do." The judge nodded thoughtfully, then adjourned the court for a lunch break. Lucas felt a rush of relief, but also a lingering tension. They had made a strong case, but he knew the battle was far from over. As they stepped outside for some fresh air, Clara received a phone call. Her expression darkened as she listened. "Understood. We'll be careful," she said before hanging up. "What's wrong?" Lucas asked, sensing her unease. Clara sighed. "That was security. They intercepted a threatening message aimed at you. It seems your cousins are getting desperate." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of threat?" "Vague, but serious enough to warrant concern. We need to stay vigilant." Lucas nodded, feeling a mix of anger and determination. "They can't scare me off. We're too close." Clara placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "We won't let them. Let's focus on finishing this." The afternoon session was intense. Lucas's cousins took the stand, their lawyer presenting them as the true keepers of the Beaumont legacy. But their arguments lacked the genuine connection and evidence that Lucas's case had. Finally, it was time for closing statements. Clara stood, her presence commanding the room. "This case is not just about wealth or power, it's about honoring a man's dying wish and ensuring justice for his rightful heir. Lucas Miller has shown tremendous courage and integrity, and it is clear that he is the true heir to Charles Beaumont's legacy." The judge listened intently, then announced a recess to deliberate. The courtroom emptied, and Lucas found a quiet corner to gather his thoughts. The waiting was excruciating, every minute feeling like an hour. After what felt like an eternity, the judge returned. The room fell silent as he began to speak. After careful consideration of the evidence and testimonies presented, this court finds in favor of Lucas Miller as the rightful heir to Charles Beaumont's estate. A wave of relief and triumph washed over Lucas. He turned to Clara, who was beaming with pride. "We did it," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Clara nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "You did it, Lucas." Justice was served. As the courtroom erupted in applause, Lucas felt a profound sense of closure. The battle had been long and grueling, but he had prevailed. With Clara by his side, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The exhilaration of their courtroom victory gave Lucas a renewed sense of purpose, but the journey was far from over. There were still many details to sort out regarding the estate, and the threats from his cousins loomed over him like a dark cloud. Lucas spent the next few days immersed in meetings with Clara and Michael, reviewing the vast array of assets he had inherited. The more he learned, the more he realized the complexities and responsibilities that came with his newfound wealth. One afternoon, as Lucas was going through old files in the office, he stumbled upon a dusty, leather-bound journal. Intrigued, he opened it and found pages filled with his father's handwriting. It seemed to be a personal diary, chronicling the last years of Charles Beaumont's life. "Clara, look at this," Lucas called out, his voice tinged with excitement and curiosity. Clara joined him at the table, her eyes widening as she saw the journal. "This could be invaluable, Lucas. It might give us deeper insights into your father's thoughts and actions." They began reading through the entries together. Charles had written extensively about his businesses, his concerns about the future, and his unyielding desire to protect Lucas from the dangers that came with the family legacy. One entry, in particular, caught Lucas's attention. "March 12th, I've made arrangements to secure Lucas's future. My enemies are closing in, and I fear for his safety. If anything happens to me, he must be kept away from this world until the time is right. I hope he will understand my decisions and forgive me." Lucas felt a lump in his throat as he read his father's words. The sacrifices Charles had made were becoming clearer, and Lucas's resolve to honor his legacy strengthened. Among the pages, they found references to several key associates of Charles who might have more information about the threats he had faced and the enemies he had mentioned. Lucas decided it was time to dig deeper into his father's past. Over the next week, Lucas and Clara visited several of these associates. Each meeting revealed more about Charles Beaumont, a man who had been both respected and feared, whose business acumen was matched by his willingness to protect his family at all costs. One evening, they met with an elderly man named Harold, who had been Charles's closest confidant. Harold lived in a modest house, his sharp eyes belying his advanced age. "Charles was a great man," Harold said, his voice filled with emotion. "He loved you very much, Lucas. Everything he did was to ensure your safety and future." Lucas nodded, feeling the weight of Harold's words. Did he ever mention who his enemies were? The people who wanted to harm him? Harold sighed deeply. Charles had many competitors who envied his success, but there was one man in particular, Richard Blackwell. He was ruthless and ambitious, always looking for ways to undermine Charles. I wouldn't be surprised if he had a hand in some of the troubles you're facing now. Lucas clenched his fists, anger and determination bubbling within him. "Thank you, Harold. This means a lot to me." As they left Harold's house, Clara turned to Lucas. "Richard Blackwell. That's a name we need to investigate further. He might be the key to understanding the threats against you and your father." Lucas nodded, feeling a new sense of direction. "We'll find him. And we'll make sure he answers for whatever role he played in this." The discovery of the journal and the information from Harold added new layers to Lucas's understanding of his father's legacy. It wasn't just about wealth and power, it was about a father's love and sacrifice. Lucas knew he had to see this journey through, not just for himself, but to honor the man who had given everything for him. As they drove back to the office, Lucas glanced at Clara, a sense of gratitude filling his heart. "Thank you for standing by me, Clara. I couldn't do this without you." Clara smiled, her eyes softening. "We're in this together, Lucas. We'll uncover the truth, no matter what it takes." Lucas and Clara stood outside the imposing glass building that housed Blackwell Industries. The sleek, modern structure reflected the ambition and ruthlessness of its owner, Richard Blackwell. Lucas felt a surge of determination as he looked up at the building. This was where he would find answers. Inside, they were greeted by a receptionist who directed them to the top floor. The elevator ride was tense and silent, each floor they ascended adding to the weight of their mission. When the doors opened, they were met by a man in a tailored suit, his expression cold and unreadable. "Mr. Blackwell will see you now," he said, leading them down a corridor lined with expensive artwork and into a spacious office. Richard Blackwell sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his gaze sharp and calculating. He was a man in his late 50s, with silver hair and a demeanor that exuded power and confidence. He stood as they entered, extending a hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Lucas Miller." "I've heard a lot about you," Blackwell said, his voice smooth and insincere. Lucas shook his hand, trying to mask his unease. "Mr. Blackwell, thank you for seeing us." Blackwell gestured for them to sit. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Clara spoke first, her tone professional and direct. "We're here to discuss some matters related to Charles Beaumont and his estate." Blackwell's smile widened slightly. "Ah, Charles. He was a formidable opponent. It's a shame what happened to him." Lucas felt a surge of anger but kept his composure. "We've been told you had some conflicts with my father. We're looking to understand more about those." Blackwell leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Conflicts? I suppose you could call them that. Charles was very protective of his interests, and I was ambitious. Our paths crossed more than once." Clara pressed on. "We've also heard that you might have had a hand in some of the troubles he faced." Blackwell's eyes narrowed slightly. "Those are serious accusations, Ms. Johnson. I assure you, any business dealings I had with Charles were strictly professional." Lucas felt frustration mounting. Blackwell was too slick, too polished. He was a master at deflecting questions. "We're not here to accuse," Lucas said, trying a different approach. "We just want to understand what happened and why my father felt threatened." Blackwell studied Lucas for a moment, then nodded. "I understand your position, Lucas. But you have to realize that in the world of business, threats and competition are part of the game. Your father was a player, just like the rest of us." The conversation continued, with Blackwell revealing little of substance. It was clear he wasn't going to admit to anything incriminating. As they left his office, Lucas felt a mix of frustration and determination. They hadn't gotten the answers they needed, but he wasn't giving up. Outside, Clara turned to him. "That was a start. We need to dig deeper. Blackwell is hiding something, I'm sure of it." Lucas nodded, his mind racing. "We'll find out what it is. We have to." The next few days were filled with intense investigation. Clara and Michael dug into Blackwell's past, uncovering a web of shady deals and ruthless tactics. They interviewed former employees, competitors, and anyone who might have insight into his business practices. One evening, Clara received a call from a confidential informant who claimed to have crucial information about Blackwell's dealings with Charles Beaumont. They arranged to meet in a secluded location, aware of the risks involved. As they approached the rendezvous point, Lucas felt a sense of foreboding. The informant, a former executive at Blackwell Industries, was nervous but determined to reveal the truth. Charles Beaumont was a threat to Blackwell's empire, the informant said, his voice shaking. Blackwell wanted him out of the way. He used every tactic, intimidation, sabotage, even threats to his family. Your father was a brave man, Lucas. He stood up to Blackwell until the very end. Lucas felt a surge of anger and sadness. Why didn't he go to the authorities? The informant shook his head. Blackwell's influence runs deep. He has connections everywhere. Your father knew that, and he tried to protect you by keeping you out of it. As they left the meeting, Lucas's resolve hardened. They had the information they needed to expose Blackwell's actions. It was time to take the next step. Back at the office, Clara and Michael began preparing a legal strategy to bring Blackwell to justice. Lucas felt a renewed sense of purpose. The stakes were higher than ever, but he was ready to fight. The day of the final court hearing arrived with a palpable tension in the air. Lucas, Clara, and Michael walked into the courthouse, their determination clear in their expressions. The stakes were higher than ever. They weren't just fighting for the inheritance, they were fighting to expose the truth about Richard Blackwell and his underhanded tactics. The courtroom was filled with spectators, reporters, and the occasional familiar face from the business world. Lucas took his seat, feeling the weight of the moment. His cousin sat across from him, their expressions a mix of confidence and disdain. Richard Blackwell, seated next to them, exuded an air of untouchable arrogance. The judge called the court to order, and the proceedings began. Clara opened with a compelling argument, presenting the evidence they had gathered about Charles Beaumont's intentions and the threats he had faced from Blackwell. She painted a vivid picture of a man who had sacrificed everything to protect his son. One by one, witnesses took the stand. Former employees of Charles testified to his integrity and the measures he had taken to ensure Lucas's safety. Friends and associates spoke of his love for his son and his fear of Blackwell's influence. The informant from Blackwell Industries delivered a powerful testimony, detailing the intimidation tactics and sabotage that Blackwell had employed. As Lucas listened, he felt a mix of pride and sorrow. His father had been a courageous man, and now the world was seeing the truth. When it was time for Lucas to testify, Clara gave him a reassuring nod. He stood and approached the witness stand, his heart pounding. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. I grew up not knowing my biological father, Lucas said, his voice steady. But as I've learned more about him, I've come to understand the sacrifices he made for me. Charles Beaumont was a man of integrity and strength. He wanted to protect me from the dangers of his world, and I'm here to honor his legacy. He recounted the events that had led him to this point, the discovery of his heritage, the threats and vandalism, and the support he had received from Clara and Michael. He spoke from the heart, his words resonating with everyone in the room. When Clara asked about the impact of these revelations on his life, Lucas paused, then said, "This journey has been difficult, but it has also shown me the importance of standing up for what's right. My father's legacy is more than just wealth, it's about justice and courage. I'm here to ensure that his wishes are honored and that those who tried to harm him are held accountable." As Lucas stepped down, he caught a glimpse of his cousins. Their confidence seemed to waver, and for a moment, he felt a sense of victory. Richard Blackwell was the next to take the stand. His lawyer tried to paint him as a successful businessman who had engaged in fair competition with Charles Beaumont. But under cross-examination by Clara, his polished facade began to crack. Clara's questions were precise and relentless, exposing inconsistencies in Blackwell's story and highlighting the ruthless tactics he had employed. "Mr. Blackwell," Clara said, her voice cutting through the tension, "isn't it true that you used intimidation and sabotage to undermine Charles Beaumont's businesses?" Blackwell's jaw tightened. "I conducted my business within the bounds of the law." Clara leaned forward. "But isn't it also true that you threatened Mr. Beaumont and his family, using your influence to keep him under constant pressure?" There was a murmur in the courtroom. Blackwell's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed the question. Under Clara's relentless questioning, Blackwell's composure began to slip. His answers became evasive, his confidence eroding under the weight of the evidence. When the closing arguments were made, Clara spoke with conviction. "This case is about more than just an inheritance. It's about justice for a man who gave everything to protect his son. It's about exposing the truth and ensuring that those who use power for intimidation and harm are held accountable." Lucas Miller is the rightful heir to Charles Beaumont's estate, and we have shown that beyond any doubt. The judge took a recess to deliberate, and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Lucas sat with Clara and Michael, their hands clasped together in silent support. The wait felt endless, every minute stretching into eternity. Finally, the judge returned. The courtroom fell silent as he began to speak. After reviewing the evidence and testimonies presented, this court finds in favor of Lucas Miller. He is the rightful heir to Charles Beaumont's estate. Furthermore, we find sufficient evidence to warrant an investigation into the business practices of Richard Blackwell. A wave of relief and triumph washed over Lucas. The courtroom erupted in applause, and he turned to Clara and Michael, his eyes filled with gratitude. They had done it. Justice had been served. As they left the courthouse, reporters clamored for interviews, but Lucas focused on the people who had stood by him. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We did this together." Clara smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it, Lucas. You honored your father's legacy." Lucas felt a profound sense of closure and a renewed sense of purpose. The battle had been long and grueling, but they had emerged victorious. With Clara and Michael by his side, he looked forward to building a future that honored his father's memory and upheld the values of justice and integrity. Lucas stood in the grand hall of the Beaumont estate. The place that had once been a symbol of mystery and intimidation now felt like a home reclaimed. The court's decision had brought more than just legal victory, it had brought a sense of justice and closure. The house was buzzing with activity as Lucas, Clara, and Michael coordinated the formal transition of the estate's assets. The legalities were complex, but with Clara and Michael's expertise, the process was moving smoothly. One evening, as the sun cast a warm glow through the mansion's large windows, Lucas found himself alone in his father's study. He sat at the massive oak desk, running his fingers over its polished surface. The room was filled with artifacts of a life he was only beginning to understand: books, awards, photographs. Each item told a story of a man who had lived with purpose and integrity. He opened a drawer and found an old, leather-bound book. It was another journal, filled with Charles Beaumont's thoughts and reflections. Lucas began to read, feeling a deeper connection with his father with each page he turned. The journal detailed Charles's struggles, his fears for Lucas's safety, and his hopes for the future. One entry stood out. June 15th, I hope that one day Lucas will understand the choices I made. I wanted to protect him from the dangers of my world, but I also wanted him to inherit the values of courage, justice, and integrity. If he reads this, I want him to know that he has always been my greatest pride. Tears welled up in Lucas's eyes as he closed the journal. His father had faced incredible challenges to ensure his safety and future. Now, it was Lucas's turn to honor that legacy. Downstairs, Clara and Michael were reviewing the final set of documents. Clara looked up as Lucas entered the room, her expression warm and encouraging. "How are you holding up?" Lucas smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. "I'm good. I was just reading more of my father's journal. It's amazing how much he cared and how much he went through." Michael nodded. Charles Beaumont was a remarkable man. And now, it's up to you to carry forward his legacy. Lucas took a deep breath. "I will. And I want to make sure that this estate is used for good. I want to set up a foundation in my father's name to help others who face similar struggles." Clara's eyes lit up. "That's a wonderful idea, Lucas. It would be a perfect way to honor your father's memory and continue his values." They spent the next few days planning the foundation, outlining its mission and the causes it would support. The more they worked on it, the more Lucas felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment. This was his way of turning a painful past into a hopeful future. One afternoon, as they finalized the foundation's details, Lucas received a call from the district attorney's office. The investigation into Richard Blackwell's business practices had uncovered extensive evidence of illegal activities, and Blackwell was facing serious charges. The news was a final vindication. Lucas felt a weight lift from his shoulders, knowing that justice was being served. He shared the news with Clara and Michael, who celebrated the victory with him. That evening, the three of them stood on the terrace of the Beaumont estate, looking out over the sprawling grounds. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the landscape. "We've come a long way," Lucas said, his voice filled with emotion. "And I couldn't have done it without both of you." Clara smiled, her eyes soft with affection. "We're a team, Lucas. And we'll continue to be, no matter what comes next." Michael raised a glass. "To Charles Beaumont, and to Lucas Miller, the rightful heir who honored his father's legacy with courage and integrity." They clinked their glasses, the moment filled with a sense of accomplishment and camaraderie. Lucas felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he had done right by his father and had found his place in the world. As the evening turned to night, Lucas looked at the stars, feeling a connection to his father and a future filled with promise. He was ready to embrace his new life, carrying forward the legacy of Charles Beaumont and making a difference in the world. The establishment of the Charles Beaumont Foundation was met with overwhelming support and enthusiasm. Lucas had thrown himself into this new venture with the same determination that had driven him through his legal battles. The Foundation's mission was clear: to provide assistance to individuals facing injustices and to support community projects that promoted education and opportunity. The grand opening event for the foundation was held at the Beaumont estate. The house and grounds were transformed into a celebration of Charles Beaumont's life and legacy. Friends, supporters, and beneficiaries gathered, creating an atmosphere of hope and renewal. As Lucas stood before the assembled crowd, he felt a mix of nerves and excitement. Clara stood beside him, her presence as reassuring as ever. She gave him a nod, and Lucas stepped up to the podium. "Thank you all for being here today," Lucas began, his voice steady and strong. "The Charles Beaumont Foundation is more than just a tribute to my father. It is a commitment to continue his legacy of courage, justice, and integrity. My father believed in making a difference, and it is my honor to carry that belief forward." The crowd erupted in applause, and Lucas felt a swell of pride. As he looked out over the audience, he saw many familiar faces, people who had supported him throughout his journey. But his eyes were drawn to Clara, standing at the front, her eyes filled with pride and affection. After the speeches and formalities, the guests mingled, enjoying the festivities. Lucas moved through the crowd, greeting guests and sharing stories about his father. The atmosphere was light and joyous, a stark contrast to the tension and uncertainty that had characterized the past months. Clara found Lucas near the edge of the garden, taking a moment to catch his breath. "You did great up there," she said, smiling. Lucas returned her smile. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Clara. You've been my rock." Clara's eyes softened. "And you've been an inspiration, Lucas. Seeing you fight for your father's legacy and now creating something so meaningful, it's been incredible." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of laughter and music filling the air. Lucas turned to Clara, his expression serious but tender. "I know this journey has been about discovering my past and fighting for justice, but it's also been about building a future. A future I want to share with you." Clara's eyes widened slightly, her smile growing. "Lucas, I feel the same way. We've been through so much together, and I can't imagine my life without you." Lucas took her hand, feeling a surge of emotion. "Then let's build that future together. Let's make a difference, side by side." Clara squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with happiness. "I'd love that." The rest of the evening was a blur of celebration and joy. Lucas felt a deep sense of fulfillment and happiness, knowing that he had honored his father's legacy and found love and purpose along the way. As the night drew to a close, Lucas stood on the terrace once more, looking out at the stars. Clara joined him, slipping her hand into his. Together, they looked out at the future, ready to face whatever came next with courage, justice, and integrity. Lucas had found his place, not just as the heir to a vast fortune, but as a man dedicated to making a difference. With Clara by his side, he knew that they could accomplish anything. The legacy of Charles Beaumont would live on, not just through the foundation, but through the lives they touched and the changes they made in the world. Lucas felt a profound sense of peace and hope, knowing that his journey was just beginning. And with that, the story of Lucas Miller, the rightful heir, and the man who fought for justice, came to a hopeful and promising start.